Let's assess Oregon's offensive coordinator.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. This episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. That's right. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Will Oregon be as good in the trenches in 2025? When do young guys play? That's an ongoing question and debate, but let's talk about Oregon's offensive coordinator. This has been a frequent subject of discussion online. This has been a frequent subject of discussion in my mentions and YouTube comments. This has been a frequent subject of discussion, I imagine, beyond the online space as well. And I understand why. When you have a game like the Rose Bowl, people look at the coordinators and say, is this guy good enough? Are we in a position to go accomplish the goals that we'd like to see the program get to with this guy at coordinator? I believe that answer is yes. I will tell you why. However, I do understand where people are coming from because as I stated, in the immediate aftermath of that Rose Bowl, Oregon got out-coached. Flat out. Lanning got out-coached. Stein got out-coached. Tosh got out-coached. Across the board. There was not a 34-0 talent gap between those two rosters. 100%, I believe that. Not everybody does, but I watched those teams play another time. It wasn't 34-0. That was a better coaching job, better game plan, better execution, better adjustments. So, Will Stein, in his 2 years as Oregon's offensive coordinator, has never averaged less than 34.6 points per game. Well, that's pretty darn good. I've officially begun my defense of Will Stein, by the way. Oregon this year ran for 152 yards a game. You're going to see more on that in a moment. They threw for 278, average 430 total. They're playing in a Big Ten where you've got significantly better defenses on average, I think, than what you had in the Pac-12 the year prior. You also have weather climates that are not as conducive to offense as what you had in the Pac-12. Last year, Oregon played, by last year, I mean 2023, Oregon played a November game at Arizona State. This year, they played it in Madison, Wisconsin. Not as easy to move the football and throw it around the yard. But those numbers in and of themselves for this season, there's no grounds for arguing that Will Stein shouldn't be offensive coordinator in there. They don't exist. Now, I often say stats are a starting point, not an end point. All right, I'll apply my own statement here and look to the other body of work that Will Stein has put together as Oregon's offensive coordinator. In 2023, Oregon averaged 44 points per game. They threw for 346 and ran for 184. That was a pretty sizable gap. And this was something I talked about consistently throughout the year, that the running game's solid. Running game is not elite, but the running game is capable. It's there. It's a part of the offense, but it doesn't feel like it has the last couple of years. 32 fewer rushing yards per game on average is a non-zero number. I mean, that is about a 1/6 reduction in Oregon's rushing yards on average per game, one season to the next. You can attribute that to defense. You can attribute that to the offensive line, having some guys get shuffled around. It's probably a little bit of everything in there. But 44 points per game and 530 yards of total offense last year. Oh, by the way, you've had 2 straight seasons of quarterbacks who admittedly are both veteran guys, but you're now bringing in Dante Moore for his 3rd season of college football, presumably to be the starting quarterback. You've had back-to-back seasons in which Will Stein's been the full-time coordinator for the Ducks, and each quarterback has completed at least 73% of their passes. Gabriel was 73.2% this year. Nix was 77.5%, set an NCAA record in 2023. Both guys were Heisman Trophy finalists. Now, Bo's numbers were significantly stronger than Dylan's, which is what I expected going into the year. But Gabriel was not undeserving of being there because, oh yeah, that's right, Oregon was undefeated, and Gabriel was playing some really good football, the best of his career. So you have an offensive coordinator who has taken two different quarterback prospects who are very different players, might I add, with different sorts of physical traits, and he has with each of them, in the offense that he has created, had them put up career seasons in completion percentage. It's not the only number I look at. Bo Nix had never thrown for 4,500 yards before, but he did last season. And Bo Nix threw for over 40 touchdowns as well. And both of these guys were in New York City. Notice I have not come out and defended what Oregon's offense did on January 1st in Pasadena. That was horrifically bad. No points until the final play of the first half. Really bad effort. Bad game plan, bad execution, too long a layoff, little bit of everything, whatever. That was not good. But to look at Will Stein as the offensive coordinator and say that he is defined by just the one game, I don't find to be a very, for lack of a better word, it's not a logical way to assess whether a coordinator is good. Because back in 2019, when Marcus Arroyo was offensive coordinator, and he was just OC at Arizona State for this past season, by the way, and he's clearly gotten better as an OC. I think that's because he has a better head coach in Kenny Dillingham than what he had back in 2019 with Mario Cristobal. But still, I watched their quarterfinal game against Texas, and there were some just utterly uncreative play calls in key spots in that game. Not surprising, because over the course of the season, there were consistent frustrations and slow starts and scoreless first halves. It happened multiple times in that 2018 season. It happened, it felt too often, in the 2019 season, where you had a lack of creativity, where things were a little bit too simplistic, and where I didn't feel like the numbers actually backed up what we saw. But to say that Will Stein doesn't introduce new formations or new looks or get his players involved. Remember the line when he became Oregon's offensive coordinator that most got attached to Will Stein was feed the studs. Feed the studs. About getting the ball to your playmakers as often as you can. I have seen offensive progression from one year to the next from guys like Kenyon Sadiq. I've seen the tight ends not be as involved. I've seen the tight ends be huge features of the offense. There is a balanced approach, and I think a very clear identity, and a successful one, and a creative one, and a diverse one for the Oregon offense with Stein at the helm. It's first world problems to say, well, he wasn't good in the Rose Bowl. Nope, nobody was. Nobody was. That does not mean you go ahead and just make wholesale changes. Well, this wasn't good. Because it wasn't a consistent problem all year. I know Oregon's offense had a bad day against Wisconsin. That's probably a different game if Gabriel doesn't throw a really bad pick down in the red zone. But still, Oregon's offense wasn't very good that day. Newsflash, nobody's is. This Ohio State offense put up 10 points against Michigan. This Ohio State offense put up, I think it was 21 against an average Nebraska team that went 7-6 this year. Both of those games were at home. You're not going to play well, be explosive, dynamic, multiple, creative, efficient, effect. You're not going to do that every single week. You're looking for, is that usually the case? And guess what? It really was. When you go through the Big Ten, you've got the Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year in Dylan Gabriel, and you're scoring 35 points per game in the Big Ten. Yeah, you're doing something right. Ohio State, year in, year out, usually in the mid to upper 30s. So if Oregon's in the mid-30s, points per game wise, yeah, I feel pretty good about what you have at the offense coordinator spot. That's not a popular opinion with everybody, so let's debate it. And send me your thought. Why do you not like Will Stein? Don't limit it to just what happened in the Rose Bowl game. You cannot define a coach by, well, this game was bad. Yep, it was bad. And one game, that's all you're going to do? This is not Dave Portnoy's Pizza Reviews. One bite, everyone knows the rules. You have to look at the entire picture. So, let me know your thoughts, whether you agree or disagree. I imagine there will be plenty of discussion there. So I'm going to discuss Oregon's trenches. I wouldn't say I'm brimming with confidence like I was this year, but I am confident you should check out FanDuel if you have not already. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5, get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. FanDuel's got everything you want. Point spreads, got it. Money line, got it. Point totals, got it. You want to spice up the national championship game between Ohio State and Notre Dame? Are you struggling to get motivated for it because you feel like Oregon should have been there or coulda, woulda, shoulda, all this sort of stuff? Well, maybe FanDuel's the place to go. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, the mailbag questions continue to pour in, which I love and appreciate very, very much. So drop your thoughts in the YouTube comments, hit me up on Twitter, or become a Locked On Ducks insider to get priority mailbag access and other perks as well. Link in the description below. You can get a free 14-day trial. Red Bear 1149, why Red Bear, not Brown Bear? I don't know, you tell me. Asks about the 2D Oregon's going to have in the trenches. Well, I'll give you a rough projection here in a moment, but first, I want to start at this spot. I do not expect either side of the trenches for Oregon to be as good in 2025 as it was in 2024. I like what Oregon has brought in. I like what Oregon has coming back. These two thoughts are allowed to coexist. Just watch this and hear me out. I can look at Emmanuel Pregnon coming over from USC and say, that's a veteran depth piece along the offensive line and the interior. And I can look at Isaiah World coming over from Nevada and say, boy, he has got a ton of potential. All-world potential, you could say. Or Alex Harkey coming in at tackle and how Oregon's recruited that position in the last couple of years and say, I think they're going to have a solid option there. You can think that while also thinking, boy, Nishad Strother was really good. I hope there's a guy in there as good as him. And you could find more production out of the guard position, at least in the eyes of Pro Football Focus, outside of Strother. Poncho's back at center. I love that. But are you expecting Harkey and World to come in and suddenly be as good as one tackle who might be first-round caliber and one tackle who might be second, third, or fourth-round caliber? Right away, immediately? Perhaps that happens. Perhaps it does. I think with the amount of experience and talent you have in that offensive line room, it should be a good unit. You cannot replace Josh Connerly, boom, just like that. The way he played this year, particularly in the second half, PFF, I believe, had him giving up just one pressure from week 7 on through the Big Ten championship game. That's insane. That's some Penei Sewell stuff. Now, the difference between Connerly and Penei is Sewell was doing it from essentially the time he was a true freshman. He might be the best right tackle in all of football, Penei Sewell. And Connerly has built himself into being a first-round caliber NFL draft selection. That didn't happen overnight. That happened over time. I know I'm going to talk about this more later, but there's this idea that floats around on the good old interwebs that Oregon doesn't recruit and develop talent, which is, patently false, but, other people don't want to let facts get in the way of their sarcastic tweets that make them feel good. So Connerly, being as good as he is, I don't think you can expect either one of those tackles to be that good right away, because Connerly played a little as a freshman. He started as a sophomore, and he was solid but not great. First half of this year, he was good. Second half of this year, he was one of the best tackles in the country. It doesn't click for everybody right away. And I look at Harkey and World and say, yeah, they can be solid. Absolutely. I expect them to be good players. I don't expect them to be the same caliber as both a Johnny Cornelius and Josh Connerly. That was a rare tackle combination. I had Max Chadwick of Pro Football Focus on at some point. I think it was during the season before. Anyway, he said that outside of LSU, who have a couple of All-American caliber guys, Oregon's combo of tackles was his favorite in the country. That's not common. There are well over 100 FBS college football teams. So do I think you can be a good above average unit there? Yes, absolutely. Do I think you can get the same level of production you got this year? I highly doubt it. Never say never, but I'm not banking on that. That's not where my head is at. That's not where my expectations are. Maybe they surpass my expectations, but obviously I don't expect them to. So that's one side of the ball. Other side of the ball, same sort of deal. I am excited to see what some of the young guys can bring to the table, like Amari Washington starting for the first time, or maybe Terrence Green, sees a bigger role. Aiden Breland will be going into his second year. Like, bunch of names that we followed for the last couple of years, been waiting for. There's going to be an opportunity there. I look at the edge room and I say, boy, you're really good. You're really good. You lose Jordan Birch, Tatum Tuiyoti's there, Blake Purchase is back, Mateo is probably a top 10 pick. This is going to be an elite unit. But can you be as good when you lose one first-round caliber guy in Derek Harmon, another guy that probably gets drafted in Jamari Caldwell, or else I imagine he wouldn't have declared for the NFL draft if he hadn't gotten good feedback along those lines, and another guy in Jordan Birch who's also going to be drafted at some point. I don't really know when, probably in the middle rounds, but that's a lot to ask for, to say you're going to be at that same level. So I think Oregon will have good trench play. I thought this year it was great. I thought it was really, really great. Doesn't mean it was great every game, but if you look at the whole 14-game season, Oregon had great trench play with a lot of talent. And when you lose those sorts of guys, I just don't have the expectation that it's going to be at the same level. So yeah, I see a little bit of a step back coming on. And an example I have cited before on this, along the offensive line, is going from Jackson Powers Johnson to Poncho. I mean, Poncho coming into his second year, replacing JPJ after being the sixth offensive lineman last year. Excited about the prospect of what he did. He had a good season. There's no question, though, that is a downgrade from what JPJ was the year prior when he won the award for the best center in college football and then got drafted in the second round. Now, Poncho could be that sort of guy this year, going into his second season starting, but to say that he was going to be that right away was never a reasonable expectation. It's never what I thought of him, and it's not what we got. But he still had a good season. So, as for what the 2 deep likely looks like, if 2 deep? 2 deep. Why don't we go one deep? 1 deep on either side, at least along the offensive line. Because the depth on the offensive line, that's a major crapshoot there. I would guess, I know who the sixth guy will probably be, but Harkey and World are probably your 2 tackles. Poncho is at center. Bedford and Pregnon, probably the guards, and Dave Yulee, the 6th offensive lineman, and Kavika Rogers floats around in there with Janoris Wilson. All right, I got closer to 2 deep than I thought I was. Those are probably the 8 offensive linemen I'd say right now are most likely to be the impact guys for the Ducks up front. Defensively, I think you're starting Bear Alexander and Amari Washington on the interior, Tatum Tuioti and Mateo Uyunglele on the edges. And then you will also see, I think, Aiden Breland and Terrence Green on the interior. Maybe Elijah Rushing sees more of a role coming off the edge. Blake Purchase certainly as well. Those would probably be the 8 defensive linemen I would look at and say you're probably going to get a lot of them, but we'll see. I mean, Oregon mostly played 3 interior defensive linemen this year. I think they want to play 4. So I think you're going to have 2 young guys that didn't have a major role on this past year's team that find a pretty significant amount of time on the field in 2025. But I expect Oregon to be good. I do not expect them to be what they were last season, and that's okay. Can't be the best every single year. It's hard to find guys, no matter who you are. When you lose somebody who is mega talent, Alabama, by the way, lost Caleb Downs to the transfer portal. Well, they had other capable, talented guys on the roster. They didn't get the same production from the safety position. Some guys are just hard to replace. That's the way the cookie crumbles. So, when do young guys play? And another question about the coaching staff is still coming up on today's show. Jam-packed? Jam-packed as always here in mid-January. But first, we're going to talk about Prize Picks. So that's the place to get real money sports action. Prize Picks. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, Prize Picks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Whether it's the playoffs or regular season, Prize Picks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying the football action. Now it's playoff time. There's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks. Here's how it works. You simply pick more or less on at least 2 players, and if your picks hit, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. That's right, 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. So if you think a guy is going to have the worst playoff day ever, you take him with less than. If you think he's going to have the best playoff day ever, you take more than, and you see how it falls. Ready to run your game this football season? Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege. Get $50 instantly and play your first $5 lineup. That's right, just $50 just for playing. It's that simple. You get an easy $50 just for playing. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with Prize Picks. Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, let's start with the coach's question because I was going to get this earlier and then ran out of time a bit in the first segment. This question from Nick. Hi, Spencer. I'm not calling for any major firing to happen within the coaching staff at all. My question is, should there be changes in some way in the staff? I'm saying specifically analysts and whatnot to improve defensive and offensive creativity. Do you have an opinion on this? Well, first of all, I have an opinion on just about anything and everything, especially Oregon related. But broadly speaking, there are a few things I have no opinion on. But as for the coaching staff, the answer, Nick, is they just have to be better against the highest level competition. You got to load up in the offseason and give yourself the best chance to compete at a high level that you can year in and year out. And then when you get to those big games, if you come up short, you got to be able to make adjustments. And guess what? We've seen that from this staff, but they're still pretty young. Dan Lanning isn't even 40 years old. Will Stein is not even 40 years old. Stein's in his second season as a Power 4 offensive coordinator. You know who he got worked by that turned a lot of people against him? Jim Knowles. How old is Jim Knowles? Let's see. Jim Knowles, the defense coordinator for Ohio State, is 59. 59. He has been coaching since 1988. He has been a coordinator since 2010. He has been successful just about everywhere he has been, including but not limited to Ohio State. He's also been a head coach before. So yeah, he's got more experience on how to get guys ready, what works in the big games and what does. And by the way, this is the same staff, not entirely, of course, but this is the same coaching staff mostly that had a collapse at Oregon State in 2022, lost to Washington by 3 points 3 straight times, and then came out this season in year 3 and beat the team that's about to win a national championship. So no, I'm not punting on them because there was a bad day in the most important game of the season. But this narrative, I used to hear this all the time. I don't hear it anymore. Lanning needs to win the big game. Lanning hasn't won the big... Guys, he's been a head coach for 2 seasons. Winning big games, which he'd had some quality wins, but he hadn't won the big games. Winning big games is hard. Well, I watched him go toe-to-toe with Ohio State. I watched him win the Big Ten championship. Do those not count? No, they count. But the coaching staff has to be better. They have to keep themselves, just like the players that they coach, in self-evaluation mode. Why did that day not go well? How are we better next time, whether it's against Ohio State or somebody else? Both of those teams used shifts and motion and confused Tosh Lupoi's defense. He's got to be able to adjust to that. People are going to see it because he's not going anywhere. So that's what I think has to happen more than anything else. And I know that we want to put the coaches in a pressure cooker and get a finished product that comes out. But sometimes to get the result you're looking for, you got to use a crock pot and just let it marinate for 8 hours all day. You got to let it cook slowly. Because nobody is as good of a head coach or as a coordinator in their first season or second season, especially at a new job, as they are in their 6th, 7th, 8th season. Doesn't mean those guys need to go anywhere. They're clearly very good. But don't get consumed by the bad day just because I was frustrated, disappointed, heartbroken, all of those things. I'm right there with you. But you got to be able to take a step back and say, okay, are there underlying factors that lead me to believe these guys are not right? I don't see those factors. I see where they can improve, but I don't see, no, this is not it. I know the results are here, but this is not it. Because you felt that with Mario or saw it with Marcus Arroyo. That's what it looks and feels like, where it's week in and week out, you've got problems here. Oregon's defense didn't have problems week in and week out. They had a problem in the biggest games. Okay, so we know where the point of improvement needs to come from. But that does not mean that Tosh Lupoy can't get a defense there, or that Will Stein can't have a better day offensively. By the way, Will Stein, Big Ten championship game. Where are my critics at? Penn State, top 10 defense in the country. Top 10 pick on the defensive line on the other side of the ball. He was taken out of the game. Where were the Will Stein critics? They were kind of quiet. So, all right. This question came from Make It Make Sense 248. I will attempt to make it make sense. I understand the idea of wanting to bring in veteran transfers, but do you think bringing in above average veterans every year is starting to hinder the development of the younger guys? I mean, we have now stacked back-to-back incredible recruiting classes that doesn't matter if they never get a chance to develop. Wrong. Sorry, that was rude, but that's incorrect. Just for example, I'm happy to have Malik Benson, but this addition feels like he is further filling a receiver room that is already crowded with young talent that needs to develop and a returning veteran in Evan Stewart. So that depends on how you view Oregon on a year-to-year basis. What Dan Lanning sees is a program, a community, administration filled, not everybody, all in every year, make this the best you can possibly do. Oregon is not what you would call a window program. A window program is one that builds towards a particular season based on previous recruiting classes, returning players, maybe a quarterback you build around, and you get thinking about that year. Now, internally, that's how I can assure you that's how they're viewing it. And I've got no problem with that. Externally, and I think I'm going to talk about this on tomorrow's show, I don't view it the exact same way, but I understand where they are at. But two things you have to remember. First of all, if you have the option of a young guy who's talented on paper because he's got a bunch of stars next to his name, that's never played consistently but has mega potential, or a guy who, again, has stars to his name now because he's played 2 or 3 years somewhere else, and you know what he can be, you're going to go with that known commodity every single day of the week and twice on Saturday. For example, there are plenty of young guys that have been fighting for a chance on Oregon's defensive line. You know a guy that they fought to bring in last year? Walter Nolan. Walter Nolan went to Ole Miss instead. He was a first-team All-American. First-team All-American. If Oregon had brought him in, if they had been able to land him, Amari Washington probably doesn't get the chance to play. And yeah, that would stink because you'd probably have to wait another year, or maybe he would hit the transfer portal. But Washington is on a progression towards reaching his full potential, which I see. And I think he's going to be able to come close to doing that here in 2025. But for the 2024 season, who would have been better to have on Oregon's roster, Amari Washington or Walter Nolan? The answer is Walter Nolan. It's not particularly close. And I am chair of the Amari Washington fan club. So that's the first way to look at it. Second thing is it's hindering the development of younger guys, or you've got these incredible recruiting classes and they're not playing. I mean, first of all, the idea that they're not playing is not accurate. But secondly, even if you go look at the best recruiting classes in the country, every guy doesn't play. In fact, most guys don't become high-end contributors. The reason those recruiting classes matter is because you are taking a chance on any kid, no matter what he's rated, about what he can become. And the star rating system is a combination of physical traits and interest from high-level schools. So, which usually stem from a kid's physical traits, but it doesn't always automatically translate. And so if you take 10 blue chip prospects, 4 and 5-star kids, let's say half are 4 and half are 5-star recruits, and you put them into one recruiting class, no matter which program you're at, how many of those kids do you think become high impact starters? The answer is close to 3. 3, maybe 4. Other guys might be role players, contributors, but all conference caliber guys, future early round NFL draft picks in a segment of 10. And again, I'm kind of eyeballing this just off the top of my head. There are probably about 3. I can get you a deeper answer on that on tomorrow's show. But to say that every time a transfer comes in, well, that means that this young guy didn't get a chance to play, or they were going to play a different guy over here that isn't maybe great, but is still better than this guy. And you have to remember, these coaches see the players all the time. They know what they've got. We know what they can be. The coaches know exactly what they have. So I'll expand on this more on tomorrow's show, and I'll go back to some of Oregon's past recruiting classes to show you what I'm talking about. But I'll leave you with this thought. In the last couple of cycles, Oregon State has recruited just a small number of blue chip prospects. And one of them was a guy I talked about once upon a time on a show called Locked On Pac-12, RIP. And his name's Kelsey Howard. And he was a 4-star out of Las Vegas. It was a great recruiting get for Oregon State because you brought in a blue chip guy. Well, I mean, he's got 4 stars, so that automatically means he's going to be a high-end starter, right? Hasn't found his way up the depth chart, even as the defensive line really struggled. Has not been able to show that potential. Potential on paper is just that. Potential on paper. And most guys aren't going to realize their full potential. But you keep recruiting as many of those blue chip guys as you can to give yourself the opportunity to find the guys who do. That's the difference. Is that this school over here brings in 2 4-star guys, and every 4-star guy has a 30% chance or whatever it is of becoming an all-conference caliber player, and that school over there brings in 5 4-star guys, and they've got a 30% chance each of becoming an all-conference caliber player. You do that over time, who on average is going to have the better roster? So that's the way to think about it. But more on this tomorrow. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.